A few months back, I made a video titled "You Were Experimented on in School and Never Knew It." In that video, I showed actual documented proof, not evidence, proof, that covert experiments took place in thousands of classrooms across the United States. Covert operations that have been happening since at least the 1930s, and possibly still take place in classrooms to this day. These experiments were secretly carried out in classrooms on unknowing test subjects that included preschool, elementary, high school, and college students. These experiments were testing for psychic phenomena, also known as extrasensory perception or simply ESP for short. I do want to be absolutely clear. I'm not saying psychic phenomena is real. Whether it is or isn't, you can decide that for yourself. What I am saying is that there are organizations and institutions that obviously believe it's worth the time, the money, and resources to carry out secret experiments that test for psychic ability. This isn't a theory. This isn't an ARG. This is all documented. There are school teachers completely aware about all of this. I say that because they often participated as agents in these experiments. In fact, the highest results apparently occurred when the teacher liked the student and the student liked the teacher, and the lowest results were observed when the opposite was true. Though liking a teacher only seemed to influence psychic results in children, not in high school or college students. Sometimes experiments were disguised as guessing games, drawing activities, word association tests, and other seemingly normal school tasks. And other times they were disturbing. For example, why were erotic pictures used in covert high school experiments that tested for psychic ability? Before we do touch on those deeper layers, I want to say that I fully stand by the information I provided in the video I created a few months ago. But of course, that video left you guys with a lot of questions and even some skepticism, which is totally valid. So this video is going to be a little different. I want to answer as many of your questions, address any skepticism, and leave you informed about this rabbit hole. To me, this is internet breaking stuff, because you didn't consent or know about these experiments while you were in school, your parents didn't consent or know about these experiments, and the fact that some teachers are walking around with this secret is just crazy. By the way, I'm 100% confident that this is the very first channel to ever cover the material presented in the first video and the material I will present in this video. So if all of this sounds new, that's because it is. You're not going to hear about this on CNN or Fox. This is just independent research. Be sure to check out my Discord server, the Hatman Archives, where you can chat with me and like-minded individuals. I've never asked you guys for likes or comments, but that stuff really does help. I do encourage that you pause and read throughout this video, because I will be providing a lot of screenshots. So let's dive into the rabbit hole that no one knows about.
We'll be right back after these messages.
An issue that I've been consistently struggling with is getting proper sleep. Luckily, I've drastically improved this thanks to today's sponsor, Manta Sleep. Manta Sleep makes premium sleep masks and other sleep accessories that are so many levels above every other similar product that I've tried in the past. Other products use cheap materials that may not seem noticeable until you actually spend the night trying to sleep with them. Manta Sleep cuts no corners. The premium feel and quality really does feel like a luxury experience. The adjustability and breathable materials allow you to get a customized kind of cozy that honestly just makes me excited to go to sleep. It's also perfect for side sleepers. The masks also completely black out light, which has helped me join the pro nap movement because you can be anywhere and experience complete darkness. I've been using the Manta Sound Sleep Mask, the new generation, which pairs to any Bluetooth device and plays anything you want. For naps, I pair this mask with the cool eye cups, which is so relaxing and reduces eye puffiness. All you have to do is throw the cool eye cups in the freezer for about an hour. You stick them onto the mask and damn, listening to music with the cool eye cups is something you have to experience for yourself. Go to mantasleep.com or click the link in the description to look over the many products they have. Silk masks, weighted masks, different add-ons to further customize your sleeping experience, and other products that are all the very best in the world of getting a good night's sleep. Use code CryptidCandy for 10% off. There is a 60-day money-back guarantee, so you have nothing to lose. Thanks again to Manta Sleep for sponsoring this video. Let's start here. Did these secret experiments happen in every school? No, they did not happen in every school. I'm still trying to figure out how and why certain schools were selected. What I do know is that experimenters and researchers had access to school records. Because in these documents, they knew the student's school grades. They were aware if a student was highly creative, spontaneous, had learning disabilities, behavioral issues such as aggression, whether they were extroverted or introverted. They knew what subjects the students were best at, and other characteristics and background information. I also know that they often implemented questionnaires, personality tests, Rorschach tests, intelligence tests, and other data collecting methods to further understand a student. They even tested to see if students were suggestible to hypnosis. Experimenters tried to get a sense of what kind of a thinker the student was. They wanted to know if the students liked their teacher, how they felt about their classmates, and so much more. They also kept private records of students. Now, for example, an experiment was conducted in 1979 on a class of first graders, testing them for, of course, ESP. In 1982, the same researchers came back to the same school to retest the same group, but they noticed that a lot of the children who scored high during the first set of experiments had left the school. This means they kept at least basic records of children they tested. This brings an array of questions to mind. Why doesn't anyone know about this? How much information on students did they keep? And where are these documents currently sitting? To get back to the main point, no, this didn't happen in every school. So if you don't remember anything weird, it's probably because your school wasn't selected and nothing weird happened. These experiments were also meant to be covert operations, so students weren't supposed to notice. As I mentioned, experimenters tested students anywhere from preschool to the college level and every grade in between. They did focus more on elementary school students because results seemed to show that younger students scored higher on ESP experiments than older students. One more thing to mention is that these experiments took place commonly and frequently. I'm talking about thousands of classrooms every single year. Here's a few examples. In 1959, 1,228 high school students and junior college students were tested. In 1966, 591 grade school children were tested for ESP through an activity presented as a rocket launching game. A single researcher conducted classroom experiments from 1963 almost every year until 1972. Here's an example of 1,403 high school students tested in 1973 in a single study. Here's an example of 1,800 college students in 1976. You get the point. These are just a handful of examples in literally thousands upon thousands of covert classroom experiments. These covert ESP operations are well documented and go well into the 1990s and early 2000s, but I'm mostly screenshotting from a 1978 volume in this video to demonstrate how far these experiments go back. Who was behind these experiments? There were many organizations and institutions and even some independent conductors of these experiments and research. Princeton, Harvard, University of California's Department of Psychology, Duke University, just to name a few. Institutions and organizations and independent researchers were conducting various different covert classroom experiments simultaneously every year, all testing ESP with different strategies and methodologies. To put it simply, these experiments were carried out by many different people, and not just a singular group. But here's what's interesting to me, It's possible that these institutions and organizations were conducting these experiments. They got their data, and now their files are stored somewhere in their headquarters. End of story. But maybe the rabbit hole is a little deeper. Here's why. We all know about MKUltra. And for clarification, no, I am not saying these school experiments have anything to do with MKUltra. But what I'm about to say is something that's a little too convenient to ignore. We all know that the CIA was behind the MKUltra experiments. But how exactly were these experiments carried out? Were test subjects just taken to CIA headquarters and subjected to MKUltra experiments? No, they weren't. Instead, the CIA utilized institutions such as Princeton and Harvard to carry out these experiments. Coincidentally, some of the same institutions that were utilized to carry out MKUltra experiments are also some of the same institutions behind these covert school experiments. So, is it possible that the CIA was utilizing these institutions and organizations to carry out secret school experiments the same way they utilized institutions to carry out MKUltra experiments? It's possible, but this is only speculation on my part. To add to my speculation, I found the first initial batch of documents that talked about covert school experiments in a declassified CIA document, which leads us to our next topic. Why did I start looking into all of this, and how did I come across this information? Here's where a lot of confusion came from my last video, so please listen to this entire portion. Former students of gifted and talented programs have been speaking out on social media, describing strange and disturbing experiences and theories concerning their time in the program. For those who don't know, gifted and talented programs, also known by its acronym, GATE, are still implemented into some schools to this day. They're designed to identify children who display high intelligence, creativity, and/or other learning abilities, and provide specialized and advanced enrichment curriculums to further nurture those abilities. I came across a series of videos on TikTok where former students of these GATE programs are expressing concern, believing that the program had a hidden agenda. Many former students describe similar things, such as hardly remembering anything that happened in the program, almost as if they have huge memory gaps. The things that they do remember are bizarre. Many recall that their gifted and talented teacher did not belong to the school faculty. They describe playing strange guessing games, specifically stating that they remember using Zener cards, also known as ESP cards. Some remember drinking a pink drink. Others say they were instructed to put on headphones and guess which ear they'll hear a tone from. Some even recall listening to the Gateway Experience, which, to put it simply, is a series of tapes developed by Robert Monroe and the Monroe Institute that are meant to induce out-of-body experiences. These are just a handful of memories former students of gifted and talented programs are sharing online. These experiences are obviously out of place in a program designed to be academic. As a content creator, I was intrigued by these videos and scoured the internet for more. Of course, I inevitably ended up on subreddits, 4chan, and other pockets of the internet where former students of gifted and talented programs speculate the reason behind these strange memories and memory gaps. Some believe this program had sinister motives, possibly connected to MKUltra, but the most popular theory among these forums and threads is that they were chosen for this program because they have psychic abilities, and the program was therefore used as a means to experiment with these children. To be fully transparent, even though I found this gifted and talented program rabbit hole interesting, I didn't believe it. In fact, originally I had about 30 minutes worth of material debunking the gifted and talented program theory. I spent months reading into educational documents on gifted and talented programs. And just as a side note, people like to say that there are no documents about gifted and talented programs, but there actually is a lot of documentation. You just have to go onto ERIC or Education Resources Information Center, or even Internet Archive, and you'll find an endless trove of documents. The thing is, as you'd expect, you're not going to find anything about secret experiments that tested for psychic ability in those documents. You're only going to find standardized curriculum, learning model breakdowns, and other standardized material. For further clarification, TikTok videos and Reddit threads are not proof. They are simply anecdotal accounts. I'm not trying to invalidate anyone's memories or experiences. The only reason I feel the need to clarify this is because some people in the comments of my first school experiment video were under the impression that I was trying to pass TikTok videos and Reddit posts as proof, which was not my intention. The only reason I used TikTok videos and Reddit posts in that video was to introduce the school experiment rabbit hole, the same way that I was introduced to it. With that being said, TikTok videos and Reddit threads are the reason that I began searching for secret school experiments, but they are not part of my proof. The thing is that what I ended up finding went a lot deeper than gifted and talented programs, and at the same time, gifted and talented programs might be the deeper rabbit hole. I'll clarify this towards the end of this video, but first let me explain how I encountered my actual proof and how it changed the trajectory of my research. Again, I didn't believe the gifted and talented program theory at all, but I gave it the benefit of the doubt and still searched for any proof to support the theory. I kept in mind that people online investigating the Gates program theory believed that they were being tested for psychic ability. And I kept an eye out for any document containing any interest in psychic phenomena involving children. I ended up finding multiple documents detailing the CIA's interest in alleged psychic children from China. Upon encountering these publications, I felt that these documents were worth exploring, because logically, why would the CIA only be interested in alleged psychic children from China? Wouldn't they be interested in American children as well? Well, I found a document called Human Paranormal Capabilities, and it ended up being the breakthrough that I didn't expect. It was declassified on March 7th, 2001. It's a 94-page document, mostly detailing the CIA's observations gathered from the research group that they sent to China to test the alleged psychic children. The findings ended up not being very impressive, but beginning on page 75 of that document, a covert psychic experiment in a Florida elementary classroom is mentioned, alongside a few other classroom experiments. It details a Holland school disciplinarian named J.G. Bushback, who carried out psychic experiments in more than 100 classrooms under his jurisdiction. The results of his experiments were impressive enough for Duke University to take notice and invite him over to the United States to repeat the experiments he conducted in Holland. This led to J.G. Bushback conducting psychic experiments in the US in 23 classes of 5th and 6th graders and 17 classes of 7th and 8th graders. The results of the US experiments were similar to the results documented in Holland. The document goes on to give brief descriptions for other ESP experiments, including one in a French elementary school, another in an unnamed preschool, another set of experiments that were conducted over the course of several years that included 7th graders, and another in an unnamed junior high. Now, this document had my attention. At first, I thought the idea of secret experiments that tested for psychic ability in US classrooms was some wild conspiracy theory. But now I encountered a declassified CIA document that contained a handful of covert experiments that occurred in the US and foreign classrooms. These documents also allude to other ESP classroom experiments. So there has to be more, right? Well, there is a lot more. This CIA document is only part of my proof, but more importantly, it was my starting point. Because by further investigating the declassified Human Paranormal Capabilities document, it led to a holy grail of further documents. So, how did I find further documents? Upon encountering page 75, the breakthrough sentence was this: "The classroom is an extremely good place for ESP experiments." This statement alone is compelling. Also, in a few minutes, I'll talk about why researchers specifically liked school classrooms for these covert operations. Examining page 75 further, we can see that the article was written by an American author, L.E. Lyons. As I stated in the previous video, L.E. Lyons is a pseudonym. L.E. Lyons does not exist. Underneath L.E. Lyons, we find that it says, Chapter 3, Advances in Parapsychological Research. I found out that Advances in Parapsychological Research is actually a series of 10 entire volumes, the first of which was published in 1978, and the latest volume was released on February 23, 2021. So, in this CIA document about psychic children from China, for some reason, they included an excerpt, only a couple of pages, that were directly taken from one book out of a series that spans 10 entire volumes. Volumes that further detail thousands and thousands of other covert school experiments across the United States. So, no, I'm not creating a theory that's based off of one American school experiment or even just a couple of American classroom experiments. The declassified CIA document was simply a starting point. If you read even one of these volumes, which I'm linking volume 2 in the description for you to read, you'll see that thousands of covert school experiments in the United States are detailed. Experiments conducted by the institutions that I mentioned earlier in this video. Why was Advances in Parapsychological Research mentioned in CIA documents? The volumes of Advances in Parapsychological Research were edited by Stanley Krippner. Stanley Krippner was heavily involved in Project Stargate and does have CIA ties. Time for another clarification. I'm not saying that these covert school experiments have anything to do with Project Stargate. For those who don't know, Project Stargate was a CIA operation that investigated remote viewing and other psychic phenomena for the purpose of potential military and domestic intelligence applications. Project Stargate began in 1972 and ended in 1995. Even though Stanley Krippner was involved in Project Stargate and was also the editor of Advances in Parapsychological Research, it does not mean that the two are connected. But the fact that Stanley Krippner has CIA ties is interesting, and a potential reason why Advances in Parapsychological Research was referenced in the declassified CIA document, Human Paranormal Capabilities. I cannot say conclusively that covert school experiments that tested for psychic ability were tied to the CIA. It's a theory I'm still working on. How credible is the Advances in Parapsychological Research series? Some comments titled these books as fringe journals or even criticized them for not being peer-reviewed studies. This is likely the response of people who shrug this entire thing off because they can't fathom the idea that institutions would focus so much time, research, money, and resources on psychic phenomena. But actually, Advances in Parapsychological Research is a collection of various studies. It details all aspects of laboratory and covert classroom experiments, such as terminology, philosophy, strategy, methodology, and the overall findings of these studies. Most, if not all, the experiments detailed in the Advances in Parapsychological Research series derive from the Journal of Parapsychology, which, by the way, is a peer-reviewed academic journal. Here's the thing to understand about both Advances in Parapsychological Research and the Journal of Parapsychology. These publications were not meant for mainstream consumption. This research was only meant to circulate within academic circles, which is why you'll never find this material in public textbooks or mainstream websites. The truth is that real reputable institutions did conduct these experiments. Not maybe, they absolutely did. Princeton, the University of California, and other institutions are behind the experiments of these covert school operations. Again, whether you believe in psychic phenomena or not, the facts are that these covert operations took place in the name of science and experimentation. These operations were carried out as methodically and as scientifically as possible. Also, I wouldn't expect covert school operations that basically admit to secretly keeping private records of children and secretly testing them for psychic ability to ever become mainstream. Why would reputable institutions want to be liable or accountable for this? Can you imagine the lawsuits? So, no, you're not going to find this information on the Washington Post or any mainstream media. That doesn't mean it's any less credible. Reputable institutions have already stamped their name behind these covert operations. Duke University specifically has a long history of being interested in psychic phenomena. Why aren't there any whistleblowers? If covert school experiments took place and teachers commonly participated in these experiments, why haven't any school teachers spoken out? There has to be at least some whistleblowers, right? To be honest, I don't know why teachers haven't spoken out. My guess is that they probably signed an NDA or simply won't say anything out of fear, or maybe they just didn't think it was a big deal. When I first started looking into the gifted and talented program theory, I noticed that I never, not once, saw any gifted and talented teacher create a TikTok video or any video debunking any of the claims. I never saw any teacher say otherwise at all. I find that interesting because it seems really easy to come out as a teacher and say this never happened in classrooms, that's complete BS, but I've never come across any school teacher denying these claims. Also, even if they did deny the claims, these experiments did not happen in every school, so even if a school teacher never had first-hand experience or any participation in these experiments, there is still proof that these experiments occurred in other schools. Why schools? According to advances in parapsychological research, the classroom is an extremely good place for ESP experiments. But that still leaves the question, why secretly test children in schools? In the first chapter of Volume 2, they explain the challenges of testing for ESP in a controlled laboratory setting. Conducting psychic experiments in a controlled clinical setting requires volunteers. Even if the volunteers don't know that they are being secretly tested for psychic phenomena, the laboratory setting itself was believed to possibly influence results. The setting could be too sterile, boring, and artificial. Also, the volunteers were aware that they were participating in some sort of experiment, which made test subjects often develop anxiety, fear, or just have an overall pressure to do things correctly or quote-unquote get things right. This is also true with what researchers refer to as gifted individuals. Researchers may reach out to someone who claims to be psychic, but once they are brought to a controlled setting or simply become aware that they are being tested for their psychic ability, they completely shut down, possibly due to nerves. There have been examples where gifted individuals consistently displayed results that were above the odds of chance, but it's still overall a very finicky way to conduct experiments. Researchers also voiced the challenge of testing for psychic phenomena due to its spontaneous nature. Sometimes psychic activity seems to occur at random. Ever think of someone and in that moment they call your cell phone? How can you replicate seemingly spontaneous so-called psychic activity in a controlled manner? If I'm taking an educated guess, and this is simply speculation, the reason they like secretly testing children in schools is because it's a way to maintain a natural environment. Often children thought they were playing guessing games and typically weren't anxious to get anything right. Why so many experiments? Experimenters were incredibly thorough in laboratory and covert school operations. Every possible variable was explored, which is why there are so many documented experiments from so many different institutions. For example, while some experimenters considered factors such as exploring how children reacted to a stranger testing them versus someone who is familiar to them like a teacher, other researchers tested factors like having experimenters deliberately act friendly or unfriendly and compared the results. Others considered variables like the weather, believing that sunny and rainy days led to different psychic results because the weather could influence what the students are wearing, which in turn influences their mood. Also, a cloudy, rainy day could affect how students perceive the world versus a bright, sunny day. Some experimenters tested for psychic ability by having children guess words. Other researchers preferred to have them draw pictures. Others preferred using techniques like guided imagery trips or guided meditation. No matter which methodology they implemented, whether they achieved positive or negative results in one experiment, they would try the same experiment on different days, changing variables like the temperature of the room, turning the lights on or off, and many other clearly thorough details. Sometimes researchers also attempted to influence results. Sometimes they promised children candy or a snack if they guessed things correctly. Other times they added pressure or deadlines to purposely rush students to see if that pressure affected psychic results. Some studies experimented by having a secret unknown person in the next room attempting to send telepathic messages to children to see if the children somehow picked up on these telepathic messages. And other times, they attempted to influence results with secret motivators. In a high school experiment, students were unaware that there were erotic photos in an envelope. Why did researchers do this? Because some previous studies found that sex could be a psychic motivator. In multiple experiments, the experimenter was an attractive woman in a classroom of high school students. They found that the students scored higher than usual on ESP tests if the experimenter was attractive. If sex could be a potential psychic motivator, what about a sexual motivator that the students weren't consciously aware of? Could secret erotic pictures existing in the room influence psychic results? This is the reason erotic pictures were placed into an envelope that high school students were not aware of, to test if a secret sexual psychic motivator could somehow influence ESP results. Experimenters found that these erotic pictures did influence results in students who displayed lower levels of anxiety, and it was less influential to students who displayed higher levels of anxiety. A later variation of this experiment was also conducted 4 years later by a different experimenter, using, quote, beautiful and gruesome pictures. Just as a side note, imagine parents found out that this was happening inside of classrooms. With countless variables and different methods, you can see why so many experiments were implemented every year by different institutions. One of the more disturbing aspects is that substances were used in covert school experiments. There were some more innocent substances like caffeine and lactose that were used to see if they somehow influenced psychic phenomena. But they also used substances like sodium amytal, a barbiturate, which causes things like memory loss and is known to produce a hypnotic effect. What's interesting about this aspect is that they don't mention the ages or grades of the students they used substances on. In almost every other experiment, the ages or school grade of the students are mentioned. But when it pertains to substances, no ages or information on the students are mentioned. Probably because it's incredibly incriminating, but very interesting. This is something that I've been probing into further, so I'll have some interesting updates for you soon. Since the last video, I've been diving into the Journal of Parapsychology, where these experiments are documented into further depth. And let's just say that these videos will get a lot crazier from here. Did I prove the gifted and talented program theory? Yes and no. What I did prove is that covert school experiments testing for psychic ability did take place. As I mentioned, this is the very first channel to ever provide this information. But the covert experiments that I found tested everyone. And by that I mean normal everyday classrooms and not specifically tied to gifted and talented programs. One of the highest scoring demographics, the mentally disabled. They even list children with thyroid conditions as commonly displaying high levels of ESP. So, I did prove that. And you can see how that's pretty much what former gifted and talented students believed happened in the program. Did I find anything about gifted and talented programs specifically? Something I did find interesting is that throughout these documents, researchers and experimenters refer to students who display high levels of psychic activity using the terms gifted and talented. This could be a coincidence, this could be evidence, but evidence isn't proof. But I did mention earlier that gifted and talented programs may be the deeper rabbit hole. Why do I say that? This is a theory I'm working on, and I think I found some corroborating evidence. Maybe general classroom experiments were part of a screening process, and maybe researchers found common characteristics of children who score high on ESP experiments. It would make sense to isolate these high-scoring children and test them further. Gifted and talented programs do remove students from their regular classroom, and they're taken to separate designated rooms. Gifted and talented programs also allow students to be taken off campus, completely separated from the school faculty and other students. I've been chipping away trying to prove the gifted and talented program theory once and for all. I've been taking a closer look at the players involved in the creation of gifted programs. I'm looking at their connections and where they got their funding from. And here's what I can promise. I am working on the deepest, most comprehensive gifted and talented program video on the internet. And hopefully, I can be the first to prove that theory with actual documentation. Thank you for spending your time with me. If you want to support my work further, be sure to check out Patreon and my Discord server. I'm sure you know that the links are in the description box. But watching my videos is already a huge help. I really appreciate the support. I appreciate all the emails and messages, and just know that it's something I really care about. But as always, I will see you in the next one.